Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you The Fox Valley Murders by John Holbrook Vance. This is copyright 1966 by Bobbs and Merrill. It's not part of their Black Bat mystery line, so I wonder if that mystery imprint at that particular house had gone away by the time this book was published. So, people who watch this channel know that I often admit to bizarre or unorthodox reasons for choosing the books that I have chosen. And I will straight up admit that the reason I chose this book to read is for the cover design. It's by one of my favorite cover designers, Jack Fetter, who also designed a lot of the late Charlotte Armstrong books. And he has kind of just a very expressive and minimalist way of designing a jacket that I just think is terrific. I think the font is great. I like the colors, the black and the blue. It does kind of give you the impression that bodies are falling all over the place in this book, which isn't really quite the case. But it's still really, really a very fine cover. I loved it. And I saw it and I thought I recognized his style immediately. And I said to the bookshop owner, John Holbrook Vance, is that the same as Jack Vance? And I was told yes. So I had heard of Jack Vance mostly as a science fiction and fantasy writer. And it turns out that he also wrote a few mysteries. Science fiction fantasy was really his main gig. But he wrote some mysteries, including this one and a follow-up featuring Sheriff Joe Bain of the fictional San Rodrigo County in California. He also, interestingly, wrote several books under the Ellery Queen name. He sent them in. They were pretty heavily edited, but he did write a number of the Ellery Queen books. So he has his street cred as a mystery writer, although not to the extent he didn't make the impact on mysteries that he did on science fiction and fantasy. So that was my reason for choosing this book. And I've already told you a little bit about John Holbrook Vance, so I will get right into the book. So it is... It reminded me a little bit of the Tony Hillerman books, in that it takes place in sort of a very, very specific geography that he has made up. And as the book starts, acting Sheriff Joe Bain has just taken on that role because the sheriff has croaked and he is now the acting sheriff. Joe Bain is now the acting sheriff until the next election. And the deceased sheriff, the late sheriff, was sort of this, lard-ass kind of quasi-corrupt, glad-handing kind of, parody of what we think of every small-town politician being. And in the course of the book, Joe decides he wants to run for the office against a guy who's very well positioned in California politics and looks like he'll sweep the election. But Joe decides he likes the job and he wants to kind of clean up the office and, do some good for the world. And that is what he does throughout the book. And in fact, Vance is kind of funny about it because he's got Joe, every time he meets somebody new, he's asking them for their vote in the upcoming election. And most of the people that he meets in the course of investigations hate him on sight. But, totally, blind, or fixated Joe Bain doesn't care about that. He just wants to be elected sheriff in the next election. And so Vance has some fun with Bain being kind of clueless that the people he asks for his vote are in no way, shape, or form going to give him their vote. So the plot begins interestingly when a man who was sentenced to 16 years in prison is released. He had been accused of murdering a teenage girl. He leaves prison and he comes back to the only place he knows, which is Fox Valley, San Rodrigo County, California. And because he's been in prison for 16 years and renting out his property for all that time, he comes back pretty well heeled. He's got plenty of money. And soon after his arrival, pretty much everybody who testified against him in court receives a cryptic message from him saying something to the effect of, I lost 16 years of my life in prison, even though I'm an innocent man. What are you going to do about it? So it's just cryptic enough to feel, like it can have several interpretations put on it, right? Is it a little threatening? Is it more of a note of pain? Like, you really put me here and I would now like you to do something to help me regain my reputation or prove that I was not the murderer of this teenage girl. But of course, everybody takes it as a massive threat, and the town, being a small town, is completely aligned against him. I guess as expected in a small town, right? That where people are kind of in each other's faces and business every minute of the day, not always to the good. They don't want a convicted killer in their neighborhood, and that felt, even though it felt a little over the top to me, I was reminded that at one time in my life, unbeknownst to me, I was living in a neighborhood in which a convicted pedophile lived. And when word got out, all hell broke loose, right? Because it was a nice suburban town and this guy had served his time and had nowhere else to go but his elderly parents' house. And the police put like a 24-hour watch on him. And so he was afraid to leave the house. And the father was so stressed out he had a heart attack. I mean, there's a lot of really messy stuff going on there. But I understood why a community would say, in our eyes, you're guilty and you were convicted by a court of law. We don't want you here. And so there's a lot of threats made against him. And he's probably not the most intelligent of guys. He just kind of lets a lot of it go over his head. Although the sheriff keeps saying to him, you better watch yourself. You better watch your ass because people around here, I can't be watching all of them all the time and something not good could happen to you. Well, sure enough, the bodies do start falling and our ex-con is an immediate suspect. And Joe Bain drives around San Rodrigo County, investigating the case and trying to figure out what exactly whether the guy is guilty or not. So it's an interesting setup. It does feel a little contrived to me. Especially some of the later murders don't feel particularly well motivated, but I do think it's a pretty well written book, and I do see some wit in the author, which I like. The book also has a feature. Let me see. I should have bookmarked this. That I like in books when they include maps of the location. So here's a map of this town of Marblestone and its environs. That's nice to see. And then there's also a map here of this fictional San Rodrigo County in California. And so just the presence of those maps is kind of a hint to what the author finds important in his writing. He's writing as much about the environs and the different towns in this county and the different feel of these towns as he is about investigating the crime. There are some interesting secondary characters. The secretary at the sheriff's office is this woman, Mrs. Rostvolt, who runs the office with an iron fist, and Joe Bain realizes very quickly that she's not above taking some graft and, putting her fingers into different pies, for a couple bucks here and there. And Joe is not into corruption, so he wants to get rid of her. And that character resonated with me too, Mrs. Rostvolt, because I'm thinking of one job in particular. There was an office manager who was very much like this woman, who was just evil. She was just evil to the core. And, like the kind of person you could see her second job being flicking the switch up on an electric chair, because she had no human soul, right? Or, she could have been a beheader in the Middle Ages. I mean, that was who she was. And Mrs. Rostvolt is not unlike that. So while I like the stuff about the geography, I felt that it was a little bit overdone, because so much of the book is about making a right turn on this street and turning left onto this county highway and then turning right onto this main drag and then turning left on an unnumbered lane. And, it kind of feels like sometimes when you read spy books or international thrillers or intrigue, that sometimes the authors think that just spouting the names of thoroughfares in particular cities gives the book a feeling of really being in that city. Of course, it takes much more than that. I thought that the geography here was, well established or whatever, but I almost felt like it took too much of a front seat. But I could deal with it because the book was entertaining and had an unexpected outcome that I didn't see coming. I like Joe Bain as an investigator. He's a little understated. His background is that his wife left him for another guy, and he now lives with his mother, and they're raising his teenage daughter. And you don't really see too many family dynamics, a little bit there. But basically, it's Joe going around in his sheriff car, investigating the case and asking people for their votes. And the climax, I can say this without a spoiler, is kind of a literal grandstanding climax. And to understand what I mean, you will have to read the book. So my overall take on this book was I enjoyed it. I have the sequel. I think it's called The Pleasant Grove Murders, that I will read at some point. I got both books at the same time because I couldn't resist the jackets, and I will show it to you again. I don't know that I feel in a rush to read a second Joe Bain book. I guess because I didn't feel like it gave me anything really special or anything beyond kind of genre conventions. Well done genre conventions, but not really. I wouldn't say there was anything particularly spicy or interesting or different about it. And I do like something a little avant-garde, a little different, that makes my eyebrows perk up. It makes me think, oh, this is interesting. I like what the author is doing. So that's what I've got for you tonight. John Holbrook Vance, The Fox Valley Murders, copyright 1966. And I will be back next time with another, I hope, great book for you. Thank you and good night.